You're listening to the Gutsy podcast, where we talk about all things real, raw, and ridiculous about running a business authentically. I'm Laura Wallace, also known as the Laura Aura, lover of all things inspirational, owner of Works Graphic Design, and your host on this journey through entrepreneurship. I'm here to help you get out of your head and back into action as a passionate business rock star. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday as we fuel your Gutsy. Sharing your story with the world can seem underwhelmingly kind of overwhelming. You're saying, nobody wants to hear my story. Who's actually going to read it? What if they judge me or say something negative online? Being vulnerable and putting yourself out there takes gutsy of its own. But when you do, the power starts to unfold. Today, we're talking about the power of storytelling. And to do that, I have the most amazingly talented Jenny J. Jenny is the founder and visionary behind the Double J Collective, a photography and videography studio specializing in storytelling for personal, wedding, commercial, and brand work. Known for her terrible puns, her tendency to travel the world, and her passion for great storytelling, she spends her days and nights creating and living. Jenny, I'm super excited to have you. Welcome to the Gutsy podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I have to know about these terrible puns and jokes.
Okay, so if we dive right into there, honestly, when I first started my own personal brand, that's all I wanted anyone to know about me. I was like, everyone just needs to know I like puns, and they're terrible and they're awful, and I will die laughing to myself, and I'm okay with that. So that's where the puns come from.
I love it. Do you have like a go-to one? Do you have a favorite one?
I have like it's a really bad joke, and I heard it on Suits. I think it's on like the end of season 3, and Mike, is it? He says it to, I can't even remember her name, but Meghan Markle. It's a really bad joke though. I don't know if I can.
We've set the bar, so we have to tell the really bad joke now.
So, a doe walks out of a forest and says, "That's the last time I do that for $2."
Oh. see, that's great. That's
it's like my favorite of all time.
I can appreciate this. This is really funny.
Yeah, so that's my go-to. And if you're not Canadian or American, it's really hard for you to get it because I don't think anyone else uses the slang butts.
Sure.
But yeah.
No, that's hilarious. Look, if we can't laugh at ridiculous things and at ourselves, then like what is life?
Right.
So I'm curious. Thank you so much for sharing. That was hilarious. I am curious. So like, tell me your entrepreneurial story. Like, how did you get into photography and videography? Like, what's the backstory?
So the backstory is a super interesting one. So I remember being 13 years old, the very first time that I was really just kind of playing around with the idea of photography as a career. And so at my middle school, we had something called like Discovery Week at the end of the year. And when you were in grade 6, 7, and 8, you could choose like one week, and it was no classes. You could choose whatever like program activity you wanted to do, and the whole school like partook in it. And so they had different things. So you could go to Montreal for the week. You could go to Niagara Falls for the week. You could do volleyball for a week. You could do scrapbooking. And there was one that was like a photography one. And I remember being 13 years old, and I really wanted to do the photography one. And at the time, we only had one really awful film camera. Like it wasn't even the nice DSLR film cameras.
Right.
It was just like a shitty.
Yeah. Oh, you're in safe place. You can drop the bombs here.
Okay. I was like, it was rough. And so I remember going to my parents, and I didn't really understand necessarily the concepts of, money and what we had at the time. And I just remember saying like, I really want to do this. We get to go to the Toronto Zoo and to Niagara Falls, and we're going to take all these photos. And what if I become a photographer one day? Like, I cannot work with whatever you've got here. So we need to get a camera. And I remember my dad, like we went to the Best Buy, And my dad looked at me and he was like, "Are you really going to be a photographer?" And I was like, "Yeah, Dad." Yeah, of course.
Absolutely, of course I am.
Absolutely. So he bought this like Sony Cybershot, like 7 megapixel camera, which now sounds ridiculous. But at the time, it still was like $180, which was a lot of money for my family at the time. And that was in a way, it was the start of something. But it kind of kept. There were pieces throughout my childhood and throughout my teenage years that really were like, this form of storytelling is something that I really love. And I think at the root of it, like in talking about storytelling, that's been there from the get go. I remember being 6 years old and I wrote this short story called Stinky Cindy. It was about a very smelly princess named Cindy, obviously inspired by Cinderella. And she had a smelly cow. And I wrote this little fairy tale of this person who just wasn't liked because she just didn't take a bath. And like these concepts of storytelling, whether it was through writing, whether it was through making little video edits, whether it was like playing with my uncle's camcorder or trying to understand the world of photography, they all just kind of were there throughout. And I think it really all came together when I got to university and I knew that I loved this. I was already working at my student newspaper and I wanted to go into multimedia. And I was 19 when I had a migraine induced stroke. So,
Wow.
yeah, so the left side of my body was completely paralyzed. I was like just living and working in the Yukon, and because I found a job in the Yukon and that's where I was. And after that happened, I was kind of like, I know I was really young. But I think when you're that young, you think you're going to live forever. You think you can eat whatever. You think you can do whatever. And it's okay because life isn't going to start for at least another 5 years. Right. And for me, having that entire experience, it was kind of like, if this is it, if this is all that I'm given, and I have just waited and I continue to wait for the time that everyone as a whole is going to tell me that my life is going to begin, I don't think that's any way for me to live. So I started taking it super seriously after that happened at 19. And like at 20 is when I first registered my own business and just kind of started taking it from there.
Unbelievable. Wow. Whew. So
Yeah,
I'm always
it
like,
was a wild ride.
that's amazing. I mean, I just love it. I think the entrepreneurial journey is so absolutely fascinating because some people are still trying to figure out what that one thing is, and other people it has just been like seeping out of their pores essentially since the day they were born. So
Mhm.
I love hearing that like photography and storytelling has basically always been a part of your life. And, when you're faced with that adversity, like it puts a lot of stuff in perspective, right? Like, what are we actually waiting for?
Exactly. And for me, I think what was the hardest part, and I never really understood it until now, that everything always leads up to like the bigger picture. And what I was really, really struggling with throughout is the fact that I love writing. I was writing poetry since I was a kid. I love photography. I absolutely love like working with video. And it just felt like there were too many things. And I was constantly being told, you need to pick one. Like you should either just be a photographer or just go into like film or just be a writer. There was no person that was saying that there was any way to mix all of them together and to actually create a world and a career out of it. And I think that realization was the part that was the hardest for me, that no, there are ways you can do it. And in a weird sort of way, I know we talk about storytelling and it becomes almost like a buzzword in the concepts of branding and marketing. But storytelling really is about that bigger story as a whole. And it doesn't matter what medium you're using to deliver that message.
I love it. So I'm curious because, much like even the word branding, which, can seem like kind of one of those cloud words,
Mhm.
I'm curious what storytelling means to you and how that is portrayed.
So for me, it is really and truly the power of using whatever either experiences or feelings that come from a certain place and using that feeling to inspire other people to feel into action.
Hmm.
So that's the way that I see it. Because the power of stories, yes, is to share history, like from a very historical perspective. Storytelling and oral storytelling was how we treasured and how we held on to our history. And now, as we get into the modern day world, storytelling is actually the means and method to still empower people and to have people empathize with whatever it is that you're trying to share, right? And when it comes to like taking that into a very commercial setting, let's say, um, for me, powerful storytelling looks like being able to explain why people do what they do, or why people create the product that they've created, or why people are getting up in the morning to do the things that they do. And hopefully, if you tell that story in a really good way, it empowers the listener or the viewer or the person consuming that story to do something about it, to whether it's to um, engage with that brand, or whether it's to say, wow, I could do the same thing too in my own life. It empowers them into action when you hear good stories.
It's so true. And I think one of the most powerful aspects of storytelling is it humanizes things,
Absolutely.
and it makes people say, okay, well, this person, you form almost a relationship, whether you know this person or not. Like when you hear a really
Mhm.
great story, your soul is touched.
Yeah,
And when that person calls you to action or invites you to come to something or wants you to be part of something, that that movement into action is cut in like a fraction.
exactly. It just makes the whole you want to be a part of the process because you know their story, you know who they are, you know maybe like a part of what has led them to doing the things that they're doing now. So absolutely. And I think in a whole different world, um, coming from someone who is also really deep in the work of advocacy and that realm, storytelling is also one of the strongest ways for people within marginalized communities to get heard. Because often there is a very real barrier to change, because not enough money or dollars or resources have been spent on getting the right statistics when it comes to people of color and their experiences and their lives, or marginalized communities as a whole and their experiences and their lives. So sometimes there aren't even the statistics there to show and to prove that action needs to happen. And the best ways to, again, motivate people into action is by simply having people who are ready and courageous and powerful, and able to tell and share their stories.
I love it. I'm thinking about, so this is kind of a silly example, but um, we have American Idol, and I can think of like when we watch that show at home,
Mm-hmm.
the when they start to get narrow people down and they start showing like the stories of
Mm-hmm.
where the contestants come from and what their family circumstances are or what challenges they've overcome to actually get there, and you start to form a relationship with this person. You've
Absolutely.
never met them and you may never, but now you're like personally invested in this person because you know something about them. They're not just a singer to you anymore. Now they're a
Exactly.
person.
Yeah. And that's what makes you, again, inspired into action. Like inspired to get your phone out and vote for
To
them.
vote for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. I think that storytelling is around us more than maybe we even realize, but when you start really
Absolutely.
breaking it down, like it's part of our everyday life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I know that some people get really worried about sharing their story. Like, is it too much? Is it not enough? So I'm curious from your perspective, what are some key elements that you see being effective in storytelling?
So one thing that I'm actually going to quote my friend because I she's the one who said this so eloquently, and I hold this really close to me. And this is from my friend Jessica. She's the Connection Collective on Instagram. If you want to look her up later, but she said that when you are still in the story, it is not the right time to share it.
Oh,
So first and
oh,
foremost, you can't be in it. You gotta wait till you're out, you've seen it, you've healed, you've taken a look at the whole story, you know the picture, and like that's when you should be sharing. And I could not agree with that more. Because when things are because life and stories they get messy, and sometimes it's easy to want to share when we're in it because it's cathartic and it might be healing. But in my opinion, when it comes to pairing storytelling like that with, let's say, the overall marketing of your personal brand and, things like that, that's when you wait, you share your story with like your therapist, your friends, the people who you need as your support system. And then when you're finally out of it, take a deep look and you say, okay, what parts of sharing this story is actually going to empower people? Because I find that sometimes in the nitty gritty of like really wanting to be vulnerable and sharing stories, sometimes it can end up being just like an outpouring of emotion, and it's not directed anywhere, right? And when it's not directed anywhere, then it sometimes can be, instead of motivating, it can be really heavy on the listener. And if it's heavy on the listener and they don't know what action they should do, like I don't think that is a good transference of energy, right? And powerful storytelling is to be able to transfer energy in a way that inspires the next person who's listening to kind of do the same.
And that's such an important reason why wait, like if you're in it, why not to start sharing that now? Because
Mm-hmm.
when you're in, when you're in the trenches, emotions are heightened, both good
Yeah,
and bad. And honestly, you don't necessarily have all the perspective, right? So
exactly.
once you have lived that chapter of your life, you can look back and tell the story maybe with or without getting emotional, but from a
Mhm.
different perspective. And you have like knowledge now. Like I learned
Yeah,
this is what I learned from that, and this is what I want to give to you.
yeah, exactly. Whereas if I were, I mean, anything that I'm still in, I'm always just like, okay, it's going to be a great story for later.
Oh my gosh, I do the same thing.
Not right now. However, like give it 12 months. It'll be fine. And then I'll share this. And then I'll know what I'm supposed to know from this.
Yeah.
So that would be a key takeaway.
I'm a huge advocate for like calling that stuff out and knowing, like using that for
Mhm.
power. Like when something is going really crazy, or like you're having a really tough time in your business, or something's going on personally, or just whatever is
Mhm.
happening, like in that moment recognizing and being able to like stop and say, you know what, this is part of something that I need to learn, and I get
Mhm.
to share knowledge later. Like
Yeah,
it may suck really bad right now, but I'm doing something very valuable that my future self and other people are going to need.
exactly. Like 100%. Yes. Yes.
So the other thing is when we mix in, storytelling with business, I think sometimes
Mhm.
business owners are really fragile about like how much of my personal life do I put out there? Like how behind the scenes should I let people know? Like how do you help people gauge um, how to integrate storytelling with when they're like the business owner?
So the way that I see that is, so what I've done is when I started creating and really understanding like my own personal brand and who I am as a business owner, is that at the end of the day, and you learn this when you learn documentary film or filmmaking as a whole, everyone that you choose to insert into the story that is your life, everyone that you choose to share, is inevitably going to become a character in the story that you're telling. Right.
Mm,
So if you understand the concepts of storytelling, even let's say as a novel, because that's easy to break down, every single person or place or thing that you write into that book, that's a part of that story. And you get to choose, as the person who is deciding what to share, you get to choose what you want to be a part of that world. So for me, one of the first things I did, when I really knew I wanted to share more about my life and who I was and what I was doing, is I kind of wrote down my non-negotiables of things I never wanted to share online. So I know that there are certain members of my family that you will probably never see on my social media. At least like outside of Facebook, like you on my Instagram and anything public in terms of building that story of who I am and what it is I do. You're not going to see my sister. You're not going to see my dad. You're not going to see any of that unless it actually directly relates. And they're not main characters in my story, right? So I have my boundaries and my non-negotiables of things that I'm willing to share and things that I think work towards building the bigger story that I'm telling. So one of the things is that I work with my partner, Darcy, and he is now a big part of this story of me as a full-time photographer and videographer and what it means to do this work as like two people of color living our lives, living our world. And he is such a main character in my world. And I'm very okay with that. And my non-negotiable is that when it comes to us with our individual families and the time that we spend with them, that's off the books. That doesn't get to be shared. So I think what we sometimes fail to do properly when we want to, be vulnerable and share our stories, and when we're business owners and we're trying to navigate that, is that sometimes we forget that more does not always mean quality. And that these boundaries that we set, like, we need to set them, and that's what's actually going to make it stronger, because a story will never have every single piece of every single person's life, right? It will center around like the main idea, the main plot, the main thing that you're trying to showcase, and the main adversity, or the main I'm struggling to find my words here. Tim, if you can take this small last part out. The A story will always be centered around the people and the main things that they are navigating. So I think starting off with figuring out what those boundaries are. And once you have that, like, just keep building on that. It's okay if you're a business owner to share about, your life as a mom, if that's a part of your business. And if what you're eating for lunch today has nothing to do with your building that story of your life as a business owner, or like the business that you run, then maybe that doesn't make sense. Whereas for me, like, my life sitting in a car, constantly driving from shoot to shoot, that makes sense, because that's legitimately part of our life, like going from place to place and shoot to shoot, right? So I think it comes down to also, really, if you really think about who your characters are in terms of even setting and space, as well as people in the stories you decide to share.
I love this. So this has sparked like a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask you.
Okay, go for it.
So I love I'm even learning, like, right now, looking at the different aspects. So I think that a lot of people may think like storytelling is like I'm sitting down and like quite literally telling you about a journey of my life, versus like telling the story through I'm going to use Instagram as a platform because I know that you're super active on it. And guys, if you want to have like a drool worthy grid, please go to Jenny's Instagram, because it's going to make you want to throw your phone out the window. Like, it's that good. So tell me a little bit of the difference between, because like I know that you're taking video where people may
Yes.
actually like be telling a story, but then also telling the story through like your ongoing marketing through your brand. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. So the way that the way that I navigate it is, you have every piece of content. Let's say, like, if you're a brand, or like a personal brand as a whole, every piece of content, no matter where it shows up, works towards building that bigger story that you're trying to tell your audience. And the key part to know is that every single piece of content is building towards it, but not every single piece of content. Everyone is not going to consume every single piece of content that you put out there. So they all still have to chip away at that same story. And you have to do it in a way that you could take one individual piece and that would still make sense. And you could take the whole thing and it would all make sense together. Almost like those TV shows where, like Friends. It's like Friends, right? And you have every episode that's its own story. So again, like, every photo, every video, every time you're literally hopping on stories, each piece on its own makes sense, and each piece on its own should serve to share something, or to tell something, or to educate in a way. Whatever it is, it should work towards that. And then if you're watching the whole season all in one go, it should also all make sense together. I
That
hope I
makes total
Yeah.
sense. Yes, that's
Yeah.
a
So the way that I look at, like, my personal Instagram feed, for example, if you look at any one photo, not only is the photo going to feel the way I hope that you would feel when you meet me, and but comes through like the colors and the vibe and the way I choose to edit, but in the actual written word for every piece, I want people to see and feel and understand my heart and the way that I think. And then hopefully they all build, and they build, and they build. And as that builds towards the image that like the image of the person that I want to be and that I believe that I am, people can start to feel that after consuming a little bit here and a little bit there and seeing another little bit there, if that all makes sense.
It makes complete sense. And I love the Friends analogy because A, I love Friends, and and B, that's a really like palatable way to look at, how things can be individual, but then how everything
Mm-hmm.
collectively is working together. And I think that
Exactly.
this is really important to, align back to your brand. Like if we're talking
Yeah.
about your brand story, and you even mentioned things like, your editing and what and how things aesthetically look, like all of these moving pieces, and down to the way that you're writing and the tone and the personality that comes through in your feed, like that's all part of your brand story.
Yeah. Exactly. 100%. They go so hand in hand. It's hard to, if you really and truly understand branding, it's hard to remove branding from storytelling because they really should be combined and one and the same. Because like every good brand has a good story.
Amen, sister. Oh, that needs to be on a billboard.
Yes, I'm here for it.
I love it. So I think another thing that people sometimes get a little bit tripped up on is, when they want to tell a part of the story
Mm-hmm.
that was impactful for them, but it involves somebody that is still kind of in their life and not wanting to expose them, but wanting to share a part of that story. So I'm curious if you have any suggestions on how to navigate that kind of sticky situation.
Um, I think it's very circumstantial, and I think it's when you feel ready, and also recognizing that when it involves other people and it involves complexities like that, are you also ready to deal with what may be very real backlash?
Mm,
I know a writer, and she's an amazing human being, and she wrote a book on her experience coming from Honduras and what it meant to grow up and experience like leaving and the journey to Canada and all of that. And there are huge complexities in this book, with between her and her mother, and the impact that it has genuinely had in their relationship in publishing this book is real, is hard, and is massive. And so while this book is powerful and she has been able to amplify her voice and the voices of so many in sharing this, um, it doesn't take away from the reality of like a relationship that has been impacted. Right. And the same thing goes for documentaries too, right? So there's so many different facets of storytelling. And I love documentaries. Like by my background, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and the amount of people who share these beautiful, incredible documentaries and whose lives are impacted after the sharing of that story. I know there was one documentary I watched at True False Film Festival this in 2019, and it's on these undocumented immigrants in, I think it's Brussels. And two of the three people highlighted in there were arrested shortly after. And so it is really, really complex. So sometimes it's not as heavy, sometimes it's not as deep, and sometimes it might be for you, right? So I think it's like, are you actually ready to not only share the story but deal with what the aftermath might be? Because especially when it comes to things that are not fiction, like there are real people involved, real feelings, and real repercussions.
yeah, absolutely. It's such a, I think you said it earlier, it's such a case by case
Yeah.
scenario. Like this is not a one size fits all. There's not like a solid answer. But I love how you have just broken it down to, are you ready for what could come back at you based off of whatever that situation is?
Mm-hmm. And if you feel like you're ready, then like by all means, like you're ready. I know for me, like there are some stories that I know are easier to share the older that I get.
Yes.
And so I might be waiting till I'm like 35 to share some of the stories because I'm like, you know what, that's gonna be a good time. That's gonna be I'm pretty sure I'll be ready to, like, I'm so far away from the story I can tell it now.
You'll be so marinated by then that it's like
Yeah,
second nature.
yeah. We're just fully marinated, like lightly seasoned, like it'll be juicy. at 35.
Yeah. I storytelling is such a huge part of my life as well. I just feel very almost responsible. I don't know if that's maybe the right word, but I don't know. The universe has given me the gift to say, okay, I'm going to put you through these situations, and I want you to be the person that recognizes that this needs to be something that you can help other people with. So I get really vulnerable about a lot of things, and I can remember one of the very first times that I got insanely vulnerable. And I was out of the situation. I had, went through my healing process, but I shared that we had gone through bankruptcy, and
Mhm.
that was a tremendously traumatic time for AJ and I. But on the
Mhm.
other side, now it's this powerful tool that you can go through some really challenging stuff and still be successful on the other side. Like sometimes we think that these bad things define who we are and that's who we are for the rest of our lives, but maybe you're actually just learning something really great that you can share with other people.
Exactly. And I think like that's an example of something that's really, really great to be able to share like once you've healed, once you've navigated it. And then when stories like that are shared too, that's when you also invite other people to do the same, to really recognize that they're not alone in those experiences, to start opening up and sharing about their own experiences. And the more you do actually have that connection and people relating and people sharing, that's when you start to do the work in creating community and creating your network and creating people who really, really like just empathize and relate and want to be a part of whatever comes next for you. Right. So I think that's really, really powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, I'm giving you the permission that you don't need.
Yeah. I think
It takes one spearhead, like, right, the first of anything is the hardest because it's the unknown and nobody else has done it, and like you're pioneering something. So but when you break that ice, it
yeah.
it always 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 blows my mind how many people were like, oh my gosh, me too, oh I understand, oh this happened. Like you create a safe space for people.
Yeah. I think what you want to avoid is so one of the things that I did a lot in university was spoken word poetry. I don't know if you've ever been to like a poetry slam or anything along those lines.
I
But
personally have not. I mean, I've seen them on the movies, but I can't say that I've ever like physically been there.
I used to perform a lot. I used to go to a lot of poetry slams. Like I was that artsy human. And the one thing I would tell people to avoid in storytelling is something that you actually see a lot at poetry slams, and it's trauma porn. Like for lack of any other word, it is sometimes what happens is that we think or understand that the more traumatic and the more intense the story, the better it is. And it
Mm.
just becomes like a weighing of or a sharing of, oh, here's my trauma, and here's my trauma, and here's my trauma, and whose trauma is the worst is the best story. And it's awful. It's so awful to think about that, to say that. And sometimes I remember sitting in these poetry slams and I was just like, shit, like the world is awful. What
Like
is
everything is terrible. Why am I here?
yeah, everything is terrible. Everyone is like, it's so much pain. And I, we need to avoid that. So if there's ways to delicately, or not even delicately, but just really share in ways that are empowering and are beneficial for the world, I always would recommend that.
Well, I think too,
So,
and kind of what we were talking about earlier is, if you have had one of those scenarios, because
mhm,
sometimes it's just a situation, hey, here's what I learned, but sometimes it is trauma. But like,
mhm.
okay, so if you're going to take people down a road, you need to bring them back out into the light.
Yes,
So
yes,
what did you learn? How
yes,
can you apply this? Like, what
yes.
advice can I give you? How do you avoid this type of situation?
Hmm.
Like really like setting people up for success, because if you just take them
Yeah,
down and then you're like, okay, well that was cool, I'm gonna go now, like
yeah,
you're gonna rock people's worlds.
yeah. And they're going to be sitting like in the dark at the bottom of the rabbit hole with no flashlight and be like, I thought I was in a really bright condo in downtown and
Yeah.
now I'm here.
I thought we were gonna have a great time, but now I'm really sad and I need
Yeah.
tequila.
So yeah, that you definitely have to at the very least provide people with resources if you're gonna do a form of storytelling that is heavy with trauma and personal experience.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the biggest obstacles that you usually help to guide people through when they are starting to like really build their story online? What are some things that they commonly like run into and that, we need to work through so this really becomes part of your business brand?
I think so. There's two parts to what I think a lot of folks struggle with. Number one is I find that a lot of folks don't actually see each individual piece as a part of the big picture. So one part that I find I do often is actually educating in the fact that no matter what, if we're going to take, whether it's brand photos, whether it's a video, everything should really work towards that bigger vision. And a lot of people forget about the bigger vision. And so I think that's one part. And the second part is really that people put all of their weight into the one video or the one photo. Like their entire story is dependent on getting this one video that they share on it, right? Or taking this one set of photos that has to fully encompass what their story is. And I think having that kind of pressure on any one piece of content is way too much. So I think removing that pressure and understanding that everything is like a part of that bigger picture. And then also at the same time, some people are really scared to show their face and get comfortable. And when it comes to sharing, and that's another part because people have their stories and it's easier to share it when you're in one-on-one intimate connections and intimate conversations. And then when it comes to a conversation with the internet, it is hard for some people and it is kind of intimidating. So that would be the other part of just letting go of that fear and understanding that if there is a reason that you need to be sharing this and it's gonna work to empower people, then how are you going to do it and how are you going to feel good about yourself as you're doing it?
I think you hit a really big one on the head with people are afraid to put their face out there. And that's such a
Yeah.
common fear because they're like, what if I look conceited? What if people think that I'm better than everybody else? Like, is it too much of me? Or, even just the fear of like, you're usually behind the scenes and now all of a sudden you're in front.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help people overcome that initial like, oh, I don't want to be out there. That's not for me.
Uh, as much as I wish that I had all the power in me, I recommend people start getting real comfortable. Like it was really, really hard for me to do it myself. And I really started about 3 years ago. And I don't know if you know Shameless Maya Washington.
I do not.
Girls. So her YouTube handle was Shameless Maya, and her story is really that she was like, well, for a year, what if I put myself out there and was completely and utterly shameless in the work that I do and the things that I'm doing? What would that look like? And so I was super inspired by her and her story. And so in 2017, I was like, well, this is going to be my year of shameless. I'm going to share every freaking thing that I'm doing. And I don't care. Like I'm throwing it's not a humble brag, it's a freaking brag. This is like I'm gonna tell you where I am, I'm gonna share a photo of me, I'm gonna tell you where I'm going, I'm gonna share the work that I'm doing for 1 year. And if there really is like no result to come out of it, then okay, maybe it doesn't work. But I did that for a year, and that was the start of what has been some of the most incredible 3 years of my life.
Ugh.
So that like it, but it took like the first 6 months. I was like, what am I doing? Like, people are seeing yet another photo of my face. Like, are they not going to get tired of my face? It's that self-talk is really real, and I see it so often when I take photos of people. Like, I see their reaction to their own face. And when I see their reaction to their own face of that uncomfort that they're, taking photos of themselves and they just kind of want the whole thing to be done and over with, I know in that moment there's actually nothing I can do to change that. And that's work that they have to do on their self, on their own.
Oh, that's amazing power on you. Like that's huge. Like that literally gives me chills because you recognize that because it from a natural like human state, the natural thing to do is like help fix it. But
Yeah.
knowing that that's not yours to fix is amazing. I want to applaud you on that.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably sit here and be a very sad person if I I just know that there's so many amazing human beings I work with, and I love the photographs or the content that I shoot for them. And there's sometimes where I'm working with some people, and you can see that they have it in them where they're afraid, or maybe they feel a way about their body, or maybe like their bodies have changed, or maybe they just are uncomfortable in front of the camera, and that takes work to fix, and that takes self work. Like you can go and see different coaches to help you with that. You can work on it yourself, but it still takes putting in the effort to find a way to work on it, right? So
Absolutely. It's all in the mindset, and it's
yeah,
it's accepting you for who you are and what you look like in this moment. If we're always waiting until we lose the 10 pounds, or waiting until I get the haircut, or waiting until this, or waiting until
yeah,
that, like you're going to literally, like, when is it good enough? Like, you are you right
exactly.
now, today, in the form that you are in, and that is enough.
100%. I mean, do you know how many photos exist of Oprah, like at the beginning and the end and the middle of like all of her yo-yo diets? Like
Right.
they're just, at every step of the way, she's like, I'm still Oprah. I'm still doing it.
I'm still
Doesn't matter.
Oprah.
Doesn't matter if I'm on another diet or not, or this one didn't work. Like I'm still here. So hello. So
Yeah,
it's
can you imagine if she pulled back and was like, "Oh, actually, I'm in, like, I'm in the downswing
yeah.
of this diet. So when
Sorry,
I'm good,
guys.
I'll be back."
Yeah, it wouldn't work. So I mean, of course, she's Oprah, but she's a whole different world. But yeah,
Hey, but
um,
that's the result of self-work and confidence, right? Like, she only became
exactly,
Oprah because she believed that she was Oprah.
exactly, exactly. So that's where, God, I hope the people who are getting ready to share their stories, I really, really hope that when you do it, like you are putting yourself in vulnerable positions, you are opening yourself up and your story up to the world. And I hope that you've done the work too to prepare yourself for that. I mean, one of my friends, Kat Gaskin, who
Yes.
I know that we both know and love,
Yes.
she's the founder of the Content Planner for anyone listening who doesn't know her. But Kat Gaskin said to me once, like the moment you put something online or out there, you also give people ownership over that part of your story in a way. So I also hold that very close to me. And if I choose to share parts of me or my story, or recommend to other people that I work with to highlight parts of their story, how can we give other people ownership of that in a way that's positive and helpful and beautiful, instead of it being heavy and a lot, and like for you not to be ready for it.
It's great advice. I always find it fascinating, like the essential, like, brand ambassadors that you end up creating that are like your
Mm-hmm.
cheerleaders. Like, anytime you're posting something, they're showing up and they're like, hell
Yeah,
yes. And people become hungry for who you are and what you do, because you invoke something within them. And that's the power of storytelling, right? Like, it's
100%.
it's insanity.
100%. You get, like, if you can do that, you're doing it right. If you are able to make people excited and like make people excited about sharing your story to other people when you're not in the room,
Oh,
then you're definitely doing it
I love it. Oh, I have chills head to toe.
right. Yeah.
So as we're rounding out here, I think one of the other beneficial things, and I'm gonna brag on you for a hot second, is really building the content to help you with the
Mhm.
storytelling process. And content is words, yes, but content is also photos and video and,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
documenting things. So I had the amazing pleasure of working with Jenny when I was in Palm Springs, with Kat Gaskin and the Content Planner, and this is such a fun story. Like, anytime I hear Lizzo now, I think of you.
Yeah.
Because Jenny and I did. She took my photos, so she did a mini photo shoot with each one of the participants that signed up to do that. And basically, it's like a collection of brand shot photos for you that you can sprinkle throughout your feed or your newsletter and your website, and it's just amazing. And we were, what would you say, 50 feet away from Leonardo DiCaprio's house?
Yes. We were like literally down the street from.
Literally down the street. He wasn't home. I went to see, not there, but I can remember you being like, "No, There's more in there. We need to pull that out. What's one of your favorite songs right now?" And I was like, Lizzo, Good as Hell. So you guys blared it, and like some of the
Yeah.
coolest photos came from that experience. When you just really step into your light and just be who you are unapologetically, like the stuff that comes out of that is incredible.
Yeah, and genuinely that's massive. Like I mean, I only hope that every other photographer or content creator for other people sees this, but there is something so apparent to me, at least, when someone is in their light and they're in their power and their energy and they show up with that, you see that in a photo. Like
Yes.
you can feel that through a screen. So like when we're blaring Good as Hell and you are strutting down the street in like a beautiful yellow dress with palm trees everywhere, you feel like this insane amount of good energy that would be different if I was just like, okay, can you just walk down the street and look at the camera towards me? It's two very different vibes.
Oh, completely different. And those photos, like if you guys are following me at that Laura Aura on Instagram, like you'll see any of the pictures with the palm trees and where I'm looking just like I'm feeling like $1 million. That's Jenny. She was
You
able to
were
pull that
working
out
on
in me.
$1 million. But yeah, I think when it comes to creating photos and like actually creating that content to share the story, one thing I really recommend with people that I work with is to genuinely first, before going to the images, think about the story that they're telling. So, I mean, whether it's through words, whether it's through the overall theme that they're trying to pull out, what is the mood, what is the feeling, and what is the story? Because once you understand that, it's really easy to find the images that work for that, to create the images that work for it. Whereas sometimes you might have a really nice photo of you with a laptop working, and like I know some people, some of my friends who have like 20 photos of themselves with a laptop working, and it's like, well, firstly, how much is this going to build towards the biggest story at hand? And two, like, is there intention behind it? Because without the intention behind it, then it becomes hard to build on that story. Versus if you actually did it the flip side, it becomes easier because then you know what your intentions are. So then you can say, okay, I want to talk about stepping into your power. Here's what that image looks like. I want to talk about, the people and the community that I represent, and that's what this image looks like. I want to talk about the days where it's hard, and that's what this image looks and feels like. So that really helps actually figuring out your content to match the story that you're telling.
Amazing. Such great
Mhm.
advice. Well, I would love to keep talking, but I have to ask you one of my favorite questions, and that is, what does gutsy mean to you?
Ooh, gutsy. Gutsy means doing all the things and just not feeling afraid because it feels good, right in that little part in right underneath your belly. That part where you're like, "Ooh, this could be really bad, but I'm gonna do it because it feels great."
Yes.
That's gutsy,
Yes.
and that's
It,
usually like high risk, high reward. That that's what gutsy feels like
it
to
does.
me.
I often feel like, and I even just said this today in my office, I'm like, I kind of feel like I want to vomit, but also like maybe I want to do a heel click and scream out loud. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
that's it. That's it right there. Like the I want to vomit, but if I vomit, it's only going to be like whipped cream and rainbows.
Yes.
Like if you feel that feeling and you want to vomit and everything actually feels bad, I would not consider that gutsy. I would consider that probably a bad decision.
Yes. Amen, sister.
But
Nail
if
on the
you
head.
yeah, if you feel that feeling, you're like, ooh, okay, then I think that's what gutsy means to me. I've made a lot of gutsy decisions in the last few years. Um, I've almost died way too many times, and so process of that, I've just been like, okay, like what else can I do that feels good and is going to drive things forward, and maybe just maybe I won't die. So
Maybe I just won't die. That's
yeah,
called living on the edge.
yeah.
Well, Jenny, this has been such an incredible conversation, such valuable information. I can't thank you enough. I want to make sure that our listeners can connect with you. So, how can they stay in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are on Instagram, it's one of my favorite places to be because I genuinely love sharing that kind of content. So you can find me on Just Ask Jenny. That's JUSTASKJENNY. And then you can connect with me from there or jennyj.net.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you do. Thank you for your creativity in the world. And you're just one of the happiest and most optimistically amazing women I've ever met. So thank you for being you.
Thank you so much for having me and also for connecting me with your people. So I really appreciate that too. And I hope that your listeners have taken something out of this.
I guarantee you.
Yeah. All right. Well, until the next time.
Until next time. Join me this week as we take our power back by not prefacing your wins with losses. So many times we want to talk about like all the things that we're winning at, but like also all the things that we're losing at simultaneously. We're going to take our power back, ladies, this Thursday. Until then, if you want to tune into previous episodes of the Gutsy Podcast, you can find the links to all of the different platforms at thegutsypodcast.com. And of course, if you want to stay in touch, follow me personally at that Laura Ora on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, stay gutsy.